Okay, so what is ecology? What is the science that we are going to be studying? Ecology, the very texty definition, is the study of how living things interact with each other and with their environment. So you should be thinking about living organisms, you should be thinking about systems. I'm actually going to go ahead and define the term environment in just a second. But it's also important that you realize that ecology is not the same thing as environmentalism. Ecology and environmentalism oftentimes go hand in hand. So I wanted to put a pretty fine point on this, and that is that ecology is not the same thing as environmentalism. Ecologists very often are environmentalists, but ecology is just science. So if you're reading something that is peer-reviewed, actual hard science, you are reading ecology. If you're listening to someone on TV making like a heartfelt plea for protecting natural areas, if they're using a lot of politics and philosophy, talking about intrinsic values and things like that, that is environmentalism. But ecology is just hard science. Ecology is the study of how living organisms interact with one another and their environment. And ecology is not environmentalism. So what is an environment? This, by the way, is a picture of the bridge leading to Dry Creek Park right here in Modesto. We'll probably get out there, or I'll probably go out and film some stuff out there and talk about some of the ecology of that area. Super interesting, very anthropogenically modified riparian habitat, which is big words for saying humans have come and messed things up pretty bad by the river. But what is an environment? I defined ecology as organisms interacting with one another and their environment. So what is an environment? Okay, an environment is the biotic and abiotic factors that surround an organism, which leads us to some more problems like what does biotic and abiotic mean? Biotic means the living things, and abiotic means the non-living things. And so sort of by extension, the environment is everything that surrounds an organism. If biotic is all the living and non-living things, the environment is pretty much everything that is surrounding an organism. So I guess, for instance, currently right now, the abiotic things that are surrounding me are like my computer and like this webcam and this microphone. The biotic things, you might not think that there are many around here, but my skin is actually teeming with microscopic organisms. My entire digestive tract has got bacteria all throughout it. There are microscopic mites that are hanging out on your skin and my skin. So that would be like my environment right now. Is all the biotic, little microbes, and abiotic, my house, things that surround me. Now that we have ecology sort of very, very broadly defined, and hopefully that definition will make more and more sense as we get into some more interesting topics within ecology, there are some basic ideas that you need to know. The ideas are the idea of an ecosystem, a niche or a niche. I'll probably alternate those pronunciations, but a niche, a habitat, and then the last one we're going to learn this week is the competitive exclusion principle. Okay, and we're gonna just go through all these and talk about them individually. So, what is an ecosystem? The texty Wikipedia definition is a community of living organisms in conjunction with the non-living components of their environment interacting as a system. And if you read this carefully, you would think probably, hey, that sounds a lot like an environment. And it is a lot like an environment, but an ecosystem can be thought of as a system. Okay, so it's not just that an organism is living in a particular place, and so or let's imagine an organism living in a particular place. If you just describe the area around them, that is their environment. If you describe their interaction with that place, that is their ecosystem. So in our first reading, or at least the reading in this section anyway, talks about the little leaf cutter ants and how they are interacting, by going out and cutting those leaves, and how those things are all interacting with one another as a system. And so it can be thought of it as ecosystems are systems. Okay. Ecosystem is organisms interacting with their environment as a system. And then, as I wrote here, it's a system. So environments are simpler than ecosystems. You can think about it that way as well. Okay. So that is the notion, that is the idea behind an ecosystem. So what is a niche? The niche refers to the role of a species within an ecosystem. So, for instance, a friend and mine, I think this is an Anopheles mosquito. They are the ones that transmit disease. But mosquitoes do have a role, they do have a niche in their ecosystem. Okay, mosquitoes, not only, aside from being really annoying and sucking your blood and leaving those little bumps, mosquitoes also pollinate many plants, and mosquitoes act as a food source for many, many different kinds of organisms. And so all that stuff I just said about mosquitoes would describe their niche or their niche, same word. So yeah, mosquitoes pollinate plants. They do drink your blood and transmit diseases. And they're a food source as well. And so you could use those three concepts to describe at least part of the niche of the mosquito. Okay? It is the role of a species in its ecosystem. So the next concept is the concept of a habitat. The habitat is the natural environment in which a species lives and to which it is adapted. Habitats can be cool places like the Arctic or in this Amazonian rainforest. And when I say cool, I mean sort of metaphorically or philosophically, I don't mean actually cold. Anyway, habitats can be basically anywhere that an organism lives. Okay, so this penguin's habitat is these icebergs. Okay, these lily pads' habitat is this area along the Amazon River or wherever this happens to be. Habitats can be areas where you might not expect them to be too. Like I was talking about those microbes. Certain organisms' habitats are sometimes your intestines or sometimes inside your body, which is the case of this really interesting digenetic fluke. So these guys are these really fascinating little parasites that have part of their life cycle in a snail and part of their life cycle in either you or sometimes a fish or sometimes a bird, depending on what kind of fluke we're looking at and depending on where it actually winds up. Okay, so, but again, habitat, the natural environment in which a species lives and to which it is adapted. Okay, the last idea, the last of like the basic ideas in ecology, and we're going to have a reading about this next week, I believe, is the competitive exclusion principle. What this means is that two species competing for the same limited resource cannot coexist. So if two species occupy the same, what's called fundamental niche, they cannot exist there indefinitely. Basically, one species is going to survive and win out, and the other species is not going to survive. And it's either going to die, or it's going to move elsewhere, or it's going to do this other concept, which we'll get to later, called resource partitioning. But anyway, you should know that the competitive exclusion principle means that two species competing for the same resource cannot coexist. And here's a picture. You have all these little yellow birds on the tree. This is a picture from Wikipedia, by the way. And then the red birds move in. And they start competing. I guess these are bugs. They start eating the same bugs as the yellow birds. And what winds up happening is they don't coexist, right? The red birds wind up taking over the trunks, and the yellow birds get relegated to the canopy, or they get pushed out to these branches. Okay, but that is the competitive exclusion principle. So The next thing that we want to talk about is ecological hierarchy. I know this text is small, so you don't need to worry about everything that is said here. But when you're looking at a biological hierarchy, they typically start from the atom and they go all the way to the biosphere. So it's atoms. Atoms make up molecules. Molecules put together in a particular way make up organelles. Organelles make up cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs and organ systems. Organ systems make up individuals, although, by the way, it is certainly possible. Many organisms are single cells or small enough that they don't have organ systems. But you have organ systems, and then you have organisms. Organisms make up populations and communities. And then you have ecosystems, which are a bunch of different communities all together. And then you have sort of the biosphere, which is everywhere that organisms can live on Earth. We're going to be focused slightly more broadly on the ecological hierarchy of life, which starts with the individual. Individuals would be like you or I, or a random bird that you see flying around, or your cat, or any individual organism. I think you guys kind of have an intuitive definition for what an individual is. And then you have populations. And a population is just a bunch of organisms of the same species living in the same area. Okay, so it's a bunch of organisms of the same species, a bunch of individuals living in the same area. So I think the book that the example uses is if you see a school of fish that are all the same species, that is going to be a population. Okay. The next level up from population is the community. And a community is population of any species that live and interact with one another in the same area. So, if you're talking about a community, it would be the different schools of fish made up of different species who all live in the same area in an ocean. Okay, that is a community. So again, individual, population, a bunch of individuals of the same species, community, all of the different populations of the different species all living together. And then you have an ecosystem, which is all of the living and non-living things interacting with one another in a particular area. Okay, so this could be things like all of the fish living in an area, and all of the rocks living in an area, and the pH of the water, and how much sunlight that area is getting. We talked about ecosystems earlier, but that is the next level up. And then we get to biomes. Biomes, it's like a group of similar ecosystems with the same general type of environments. And so people will say something like the desert biome, or the delta biome, or the boreal forest biome, or whatever it happens to be. So individual, population, community, ecosystem, biome, and then you get to the biosphere, which is basically everywhere on Earth where life can live, or where life does live. Not where life can live. Life can live very, very many places, but the biosphere is everywhere where life actually does live. And that goes from very, very deep in the ocean up to reasonably high in the sky. But the biosphere actually comprises a very, very small chunk of the Earth itself. So that is the ecological hierarchy. And I just want to point out, by the way, that just because atoms and molecules and things like organelles are a little bit too small to be within the ecological hierarchy, it doesn't mean that you can't use those things to study ecology. So actually, like my project in graduate school was using genetics or genomics to study the evolution and evolutionary pattern and species relationships of butterflies. So just because it's not within the ecological hierarchy of life doesn't mean that you can't use it to study the ecological hierarchy of life. Things I forgot to mention earlier would be stuff like ecology is incredibly interdisciplinary, and so all kinds of scientists can work on ecological problems. You can have chemists, you can have geologists, you can have pure biologists. I'm sure there are physicists who work in ecology. Well, maybe not physicists, but actually there's a lot of scientists around. So physicists probably do work on ecological problems somewhere. So ecology, super interdisciplinary, and hopefully we'll see that moving forward this semester. So what did we talk about today? We talked about what is ecology. It is the study of living organisms and how they interact. What is an environment? The biotic and abiotic factors that surround an individual. Biotic meaning living, abiotic meaning non-living. What is an ecosystem? It is the way that an individual interacts with its environment as a system, ecosystem. What is a habitat? Actually, think of a habitat as like the special place within an environment where an organism lives. Okay, what is the competitive exclusion principle? As we'll see in the reading, I believe competitive exclusion principle means that two organisms competing for the same exact resource cannot coexist with one another. And I didn't put it on here, but what is the ecological hierarchy? Okay, and you should know, actually, you should probably know the entire biological hierarchy, but you should know the ecological hierarchy, and you should know probably that it begins with an individual and goes all the way up to the biosphere. Okay, cool. So please, if you guys have any questions, I'm going to have office hours starting next week, I believe, and we're going to have we're not going to have any labs this week. We're going to start doing labs next week, just so you guys all know. And I think that's it. Keep your questions through email coming, and I will see you guys online.